my mother came first. She was married as a 19-year-old girl. She was married to Steve Simas, who originally came over in the early 1900s. And he typically most older Greeks, or most Greeks that came during that period, they passed through Ellis Island and looking for work. They'd either know somebody here, or they'd just come to get away from the Depression in Greece. So they'd come here and they either knew somebody or went to visit a relative or just went where the work was. And the majority of the people that settled here are people from the mountain areas of Greece. They liked the area here, so it reminded them of Greece. We're mountainous type country, so they more or less gravitated here. Most of them went to, of course they got the lesser paying jobs, the jobs that nobody else wanted, so most of them actually ended up in Price, Utah, in the coal mines of Price, Utah. And there they'd save some of their money. And since they knew sheep in Greece, they're more accustomed to the sheep industry.
You know, my mother was an amazing woman. She just passed away a week ago, and her theory was this. We were now in the United States. She would learn to speak English, and we would speak English. We spoke English in our home so that she could learn to speak English. My father already knew how to speak and was very educated on his own after he came to the United States, taking night courses in English and bookkeeping and so on and so forth. But anyway, she insisted that we were now Americans. Yes, we were Greek, and yes, we maintained our culture. And on Sundays, when we had guests for dinner, the old folks sat around and visited in their language, in Greek. But we didn't speak Greek in our home. We had to go to Greek school. We had to know how to speak it. But Mother said, I don't want your friends walking in here and feeling like we're talking about them. And, you know, we're in the United States of America. And she felt pretty strongly about that. So we spoke English, we really did. And that way my mother spoke very, very well.
I think he came over in about, it had to be about 1914 or somewhere in there.
Okay.
And he came over with Mother's two brothers came, and then they sent, and one more came. And they landed in New York and got on a train. There was people that off of the coal mines down Price and Helper, Utah, that were getting foreigners to work there. And they paid their way. They landed in Price, and they worked in the coal mines.
My mother came over as a mail order bride. She got here about 1925. They met in Havana, Cuba. They got married in Havana, Cuba with my father. And then they came to Price, Utah, where he worked in the coal mines. He started working in the coal mines. And he worked there until 1934. They moved to Craig.
Dad ended up as a kid in Carbon County, Utah. Is probably his first job as a water boy on a railroad. And he was just a puny young kid, and he couldn't even carry the bucket of water along the chain gang. And there was a lot of Greeks that helped him out. Anyway, he went from there into the coal mines and one thing, and he knew he didn't like being on his hands and feet mining coal 12 hours a day. And you know, when he got enough money to get out of there, and he herded sheep for his family back in the mountains in Greece. The Greek animal husbandry was in his blood, and he knew how to do it. He started herding sheep, goats, milking goats, butchering, and there was enough ethnics in Carbon County that would buy this meat, and he just should I say, made enough money that he ventured out. And he was herding sheep, and he entered Colorado, working for a Dane, Paul Jensen. He entered through eastern Utah in 1922, herding sheep. And Paul had a ranch east of Meeker, up here on 9 Mile. And they had to come through Meeker to herd their sheep through Meeker, and they had to get the posse to escort them to the town of Meeker so they could go up to 9 Mile, so they could graze and lamb their sheep. That was in 22.
Και από το Denver έπειτα, κάποιος γνωστός του Πιτρούν που ήξερε εκεί πέρα, μας είπε, άσε που το είχαν φτιάξει τα χαρτιά να έρθουν με το λεωφορείο, με τον μπας.
Ναι.
Και ήρθαμε εδώ, ήταν το προκτορείο κάτω στην πολιτεία τότε και σταματήσαμε εκεί πέρα. Και ήρθαμε εδώ πέρα στις 2 Απριλίου. Και είχε χιόνια, είχε λάσπης, είχε κρύο.
One time the Germans came into Black Rock to the village and rounded all the people up. They wanted information. They were after the communists, which they were so named the guerrilla warfare. They were the guerrilla people. He had taken a .22 rifle back to Greece when he went in 1937 for rabbit hunting. Well, since a long time, he ran out of shells. We knew it was dangerous to have that weapon, so he went and buried it out in a field. Someone informed the Germans that he was an American citizen and he had an American weapon and they should be watched closely. Well, they come and got Dad, and they had some other people with them. They were called, some of those were informers, reasons to get information from people. They asked Dad where the weapon was, told him he didn't have it, but he'd go show it to him that he had buried it. Unfortunately, somebody must have been watching him bury it because they stole it. They left the blanket there. Well, that didn't satisfy him. Now here's the toughest part. And again, when the Lord prevails to show you what happens, because they took my dad and 6 other guys behind the church, blindfolded them, lined them up against the wall, lined up a firing squad in front of them. They had my mother Mary and I, and my 2 younger brothers that were real small, tell us where the weapon is or we'll execute these people. And crying and begging and telling them, we didn't know it was stolen. Well, they fired. 5 out of the 7 people that were lined up dropped dead. My father and another guy was still standing. Now, what they shot or they shot high, I know, but they didn't kill him. And eventually, they turned him loose and came back home.
The greatest thing that I can remember was Namimas Drupiashiti, do not embarrass us, as Greeks. So we kind of, you knew you were a little different. I don't know what different is, but that's gone now. But then it was quite a thing because we all lived, we entertained by going from house to house. One day it'd be our house, the next day it'd be the Thea's house, the next day it'd be somebody else's house or whatever. In Yurtes, obviously whoever was named, whatever, they had a big paniyir, all the baklava, everything else, just like we do today. And we've learned from that, and that's been a great thing. And my kids, our kids, have gotten the same habits, the work habits. Growing up on a ranch is it's a responsibility for a young man, young woman, whatever. They have certain chores to do, and they have certain things that they have to do, and they learn their work ethic, and it holds with them all through their life.
The United States, it was more or less poverty over there, and they decided, well, my father came over first with my uncle. It was in the early 20s when they got here. We went to Bryce, Utah, where most Greeks congregated. They congregated the type of property that they had over there in Greece, similar. They were
we had some fond memories. And I remember one time going to sheep camp when my cousin and I rode up there by ourselves, and of course she knew the trail, and she did know the trail, but we were laughing all the way up, and we lost the trail, and we got lost going up the sheep trail. And I'll never forget at the end of the day when I saw my Uncle Tom riding on that Palomino horse, and I can still picture him riding on that Palomino horse, and I was in tears as I saw him riding on that horse. And we were on horseback all day long, and you know, some other days of going with my dad, we took one trip. He'd never let us go up to the flat tops, which is above timberline, but he let us go this one time, and there were some great trips of going with my father.
When I was younger, we were loading rams with my father. And my father, you know, my father would always say you have to be really patient with these animals because sometimes they can be stubborn. And so we were having great difficulty loading these rams, you know. And my dad kept saying, you know, you have to be really patient. Well, in the very end, he lost it. And he, you know, he started bleeping, you know, these rams and hitting them, and we finally got them loaded. Well, you know, if you fast forward about 40 years, here we are, we haul our livestock to the high country using lambs, and we have these high-flowing streams in the springtime that you have to cross. So we build these makeshift bridges. They're not the best, but they're makeshift and they work. And what you have to do is, after we unload the trucks, then you gather the sheep up with lambs. You're talking lambs that are, you know, they're a month and a half old, so they you know, they're not, they don't know about trailing that much or they'll follow their mothers once they find them. But here you are, you know, the lambs have been separated from their mothers because they're in the trucks, and so you have lambs bleeding and looking for their mothers and running around, and then you have the mothers, and we're gathering them all up, and it's just pouring rain. And so we finally get these sheep started, you know, and they start crossing, and I'm talking, you know, you're talking about 1,000 ewes, 1,300 lambs, so it's a fairly large herd. And so we finally get them started, and we use tarps. You know, they're tarps that are only about 3 to 4 feet high, so you can kind of hold them and have my kids, you know, kind of like circled the wagons, and my kids and the sheep herder and I. But it was just pouring rain. And they wouldn't, and when it's raining, you know, livestock don't really want to do much. You know, they kind of want to sit there and wait till the rain's done. So that added to everything. And we were going in, this is like 2 or 3 hours later, towards the end, you know, my kids kept getting frustrated, and they were complaining to me, and I kept saying, you know, you have to be patient with livestock. You really have to be patient with livestock. Well, we get to the end, and when you get to the end, there's about 200 or 300 lambs, and if you don't keep them bunched up and they don't follow their mothers, then you can have difficulty. Well, then I got frustrated like my father, and I started hooping and hollering and cussing them and you know, using sticks to throw at him, but we finally got him over. Well, my daughter tells that story every time, you know. Here I'm trying to teach her patience, and then I lose it. Now she uses the explicatives that I didn't use here. But, you know, it's funny because that happened 40 years ago with me and my father, and then it happened, you know, 5 years ago with my daughter and I and my kids.
There's a lot of stories out there. My uncle Dino was a character. He was one fall we were trailing. We used to trail all our lambs. That was back before I was very much involved in the 40s and early 50s. But they'd separate the lambs up on a krail, which is so people don't understand. You put them in a krail, and then you separate the lambs. There's an apparatus you can separate the lambs from the mothers. Well, then they had to trail those lambs for 3 days to get them to Yampa down one canyon, and very difficult without their mothers. They wanted their mothers. Their mothers were back here bleeding for their lambs, and the lambs were up here. They'd go back, and so, but those guys really had very good dogs. So my uncle was a real character. He told my granddad, he said, "By God, Dad, you know, I don't know why these lambs don't go down. They go down here every year." My granddad, "You crazy?" said, "Boy, those lambs are dead. These are new lambs." Oh my goodness, yeah, you're right. Well, he knew that, but he just was trying to make a big joke. And those guys, you had to have humor in it. One time, the same uncle, he had to go to Watson, Utah, that place where my dad was born, and it was about a 4-hour ride in the winter. Well, in the winter, there's not daylight till about 7:30, and it gets dark about 4:30 in the afternoon. Well, he got lost, and he froze his face, and he never went to town or anything, but it really made a real hard kind of a leathery shell on the outside of his face, and all his whiskers became ingrown. And when my granddad came to see him, he took him to town immediately because his face was just really puffed up, and they had to scrape all that skin off. And those kind of stories are kind of what used to happen. Another time, actually, was Gus Halandras' dad. My dad and my uncle Mike, they were having a problem with their feet. The rams in the herd, they had foot rot, we call it. So Mr. Halandras didn't have it. So my dad went to him. He asked Harry. He said, "What do you do for that foot rot?" I put that muracuri caracasa. Oh God. Okay, he said. But where do you get that? He said, "We buy it. I buy it down the side's grocery store, drugstore." Oh, okay. Well, Dad said, "Well, Mike, you go in and ask for it." No, he said, "You go in and ask for it." He said, so he flipped a coin. My dad went in. He lost. He said, Bill Sides was the owner of the grocery store. He said, "You got any of that muri cas? I don't know what it is." He said, "What do you need it for?" He said, "Well, Mr. Halandras told me to come here. It's for foot rot." "Oh," he said, "you mean pure muriatic acid?" "Yeah, that's what I mean."
Δεν με έμελε και την ακροτική ζωή την έζησα και δεν με έμελε και της πολιτείας την έζησα. Λέω ό,τι μου τύχει θα το περάσω. Μόνο να μην ακούω πόλεμο. Και να έχω τα παιδιά μου και να είμαι κοντά με τον άντρα μου και με τα παιδιά μου. Αυτό ήθελα. Και όπως το ήθελα και το ονειρεύτηκα έγινε.
And looking at my parents, all the Greeks, my mother-in-law and father-in-law, all the Greeks here, it's funny, the man came over. They came over because of desperation. They got here in this wonderful world called America. They worked hard. They outran a lot of obstacles. And at some point, whether it was the clock ticking that told them, "Hey, you better create a family. It's okay to work hard and make money, but that isn't all of life." At some point, they all thought about getting a wife. Most of them went back to Greece and brought a woman back to be their partner. And in the instance of all of these ranchers, no matter where the woman came from, she became a very integral, hard-working part of the success of that enterprise. And it didn't matter if she was from a village in Greece or a whorehouse in Nevada or wherever she came from. If she was brought in, she became a part of the main effort. And I really have to hand it to these women because these old tier women that are now gone were amazingly strong. God, they worked right alongside of their men, and they raised those families, and they created a house. I have so much admiration, not only for the men, but the female element of these livelihoods is just astounding. And I think they should be looked at. I think the museum could take that element and develop it, because the woman is equally as much a positive part of the whole effort as is the man. It became a very joint effort. And today, from these families, we have doctors, lawyers, legislators, professors, teachers, common workers that have raised good families of their own. I'm really impressed, and I don't think that that's any different than the rest of the Greeks in America. What is different here is the way we made our living and the obstacles that we had to overcome. But once we got that done, we all did the same thing. And it's a neat story. Thank God for America is all I can say.